I am not a historian, but neither are you, so how about we, the people, learn this stuff together? Welcome to US 101. And I should let you know, guys, that when I was a student teacher this past semester, I actually taught civics when I was a student teacher, so I figure, why not bring y'all a little bit of a civics lesson today? Throughout this pandemic, we seem to have been getting mixed messages when it comes to how to best deal with COVID-19. These messages are coming from everywhere, from the White House and the president, to state governors, to health experts, to armchair political pundits. But the White House specifically, the White House seems to be a place where a lot of mixed messages start to come from. I'll give you an example. Like when the pandemic was starting to hit in full swing in the United States, the president, after first denying that there was nothing going to happen with the pandemic, we had it in full effect in the United States, started to go ahead and say, okay, we're going to lock this down, and started giving governors more responsibility when it came to protecting their state's residents. But then later, Trump would go on to say that he has, quote,
when somebody's the president of the United States, the authority is total. And that's the way it's got to be.
The authority's total.
Total.
Total authority, not like the serial total. Indeed, the man thinks he has complete 100% authority when it comes to being the final word on opening up the states and opening up the American economy. And then after saying he had total authority to do this, he went on to rile up even more partisan rancor by telling Americans to basically stand against their own state governments. Remember these tweets that he put out? Liberate Michigan, liberate Minnesota, liberate Virginia, and save your great Second Amendment, which then led some Americans to grab weapons, head to their state capitals, and protest while armed to the teeth. You know, it's interesting. I look at this picture and I see these white guys carrying weapons and protesting at the state capitals, and I'm pretty sure no one's going to come and take away their weapons anytime soon. Yet, if you rewind back to the 1960s when the Black Panthers did the same thing in California, they kind of took the guns away from them after that happened. I wonder why. See where my confusion is kind of kicking in? Because at first the president wants governors to be responsible for their states, but then he wants to rile up Americans to stand against their state governments. Now, amidst all of this doublespeak coming from the president and the White House and his administration, there have also been a slew of articles that have been coming out that have been written by historians and journalists which discuss Trump's take on federalism. Moreover, these articles also start to look into the differences between federalism and anti-federalism, i.e. the two arguments that took center stage when the framers of the Constitution were actually putting the Constitution together in Philadelphia in 1787. So that's what I'd like to discuss on today's episode, just to give you guys a basic understanding of the Federalist arguments and the Anti-Federalist arguments that took place during the Constitutional Convention of 1787, and how those arguments still resonate in 21st century America. So, just for a little bit of context, guys, prior to the Constitution that we all know about today, before that Constitution existed, there was something in the United States called the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation was a document that mostly put power in the hands of state governments, because remember, America had just concluded a war with Great Britain, a nation that had a monarchy. And so the Articles of Confederation was created because Americans were worried that putting all of the power into a centralized national government would become too similar to what they had just defeated. So the states were basically 13 sovereign entities, okay? They created their own laws, they levied their own taxes, they raised their own militias, and when it came to national government decisions, each state had one vote. So while the majority of the power resided in the hands of state government, the national government had its powers too. It had the right to declare war, enter into foreign alliances, and settle disputes between the states. But after disputes regarding taxes and paying soldiers that fought in the Revolutionary War, which led to uprisings and rebellions like Shays' Rebellion and the Whiskey Rebellion, there was a decision made that the national government needed to have more power to put a stop to these uprisings. So delegates came together in 1787 in Independence Hall in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and decided that, you know what? I know that there was an idea to just come here and maybe redo the Articles of Confederation and maybe make it a little bit stronger. We're just going to go ahead and just toss it right into the bin, and we're going to go ahead and start from scratch. And within this convention, the Constitutional Convention, there arise two different arguments that are in favor of a constitution and against a constitution. Let's get into those right now. So first up, you have the Federalists, okay? And when it comes to who was a Federalist, this is like the Hall of Fame list for American founding fathers. You've got Alexander Hamilton, you've got John Adams, George Washington, James Madison. Now, the Federalists believed in a strong centralized government, okay? They believed that a national government imbued with more power would build better relationships between the states and also help to protect the liberties of individuals and those within the minority. Now, the minority that I'm referring to are the economic minority, because let's look at the landscape in 18th century America. The majority of Americans at this time are farmers, are laborers, are mechanics. They're working class people. Meanwhile, the minority of Americans are industrialists, these rich elites. And the problem that constitutional framers were facing during this time was that they didn't want one section of Americans or one faction of Americans to become too powerful and impose their will on the rest of the Americans. James Madison writes about this in Federalist number 10. He talks about factions, i.e. groups of people that are getting together for their own common good, okay? And when you have factions, regardless of whether it's a majority faction or a minority faction, one side, if it gets too powerful, will impose its will on the other side, and there will be an imbalance of power. So what Madison proposes is a separation of powers. Instead of having one group become more powerful than the other group, let's split the difference. Let's split the responsibility so everybody shares in the power and nobody is more powerful than the other person. Additionally, Federalists wanted to make sure that the states retained some of their sovereignty, which is why in the Constitution, if there are no powers that are expressly given to the federal government, those powers are then retained by the states and its people. But then on the other side, you had the anti-federalists, whose ranks included those like Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death Patrick Henry, George Mason, and Richard Henry Lee. And the anti-federalists were basically like, hello, excuse me, do you remember the war that we just fought when we said we didn't want like an all-powerful entity ruling over us, and now you guys want to put an all-powerful entity to run this in? No, we're not about that life. They maintained that a national government that was too strong took away power from state governments and their people. The anti-federalists were in favor of smaller, more localized governments, because having those types of governments meant more interaction and more involvement from the people at the local level. Basically, the anti-federalists were big fans of the Articles of Confederation. They were happy of the fact that states took care of their own and they created their own laws, levied their own taxes, so on and so forth. They were cool with the Articles. Additionally, anti-federalists claimed that a strong centralized government would infringe on the liberties of the individuals. What the Federalists said, no, we're not going to do that. The anti-feds were like, yeah, you are. And to make sure that the Federalists and their strong centralized government didn't infringe on the liberties of individuals, the anti-feds pushed for a Bill of Rights to be included in the Constitution. They wanted a list of rights explicitly put in the Constitution saying these are the things you cannot take away from people. Now, Federalists initially were against the Bill of Rights. They're like, well, no, we're not going to take away your basic human right. That doesn't make any sense. Besides, the Constitution will cover all that stuff on its own. We don't need to list every single right. But the anti-feds were like, nope, if you don't do it, we're worried that this national Constitution is going to be more powerful than the state Constitution. So here's the thing. If you don't put a Bill of Rights in the Constitution, we're going to go back to our people, to our state governments, and to our ratification conventions and tell them, hey, don't ratify this Constitution. And by the way, we've got sway in states like New York and Virginia, you know, the heavy hitters in 1787. So you might want to do what we tell you, otherwise you're not going to get your way. Which is why when the Great Compromise, or what's known as the Great Compromise, was introduced by Roger Sherman, basically it sort of melded the two arguments together into one thing that both sides could, for the most part, agree on. In order to make sure that one power didn't supersede another, we go back to Madison's Federalist number 10, talking about factions and talking about splitting the power. This is why a bicameral legislation was created. We have a House, we have a Senate. The Senate basically follows along the lines of like the Articles of Confederation. You have equal representation among the states, while the House, their representation is based on the population of the states. Additionally, the President of the United States would not be this all-powerful king or dictator. There would be a series of checks and balances put into place against the executive branch by both the legislative and judicial, so the executive doesn't become all too powerful. And finally, a Bill of Rights was included, and among that Bill of Rights was the 10th Amendment, which says the following: the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Which means, again, any power not explicitly listed in the Constitution as a federal power automatically belongs to the states and to its residents, which is why when President Trump says things in a podium like, I have total authority, you might want to go ahead and take a look at your Constitution, pal, because the 10th Amendment would like to have a word with you. And that is it, my friends, for this episode of US 101. Thank you guys so much for watching. Really do appreciate it. I have been having so much fun making these episodes for you guys on a weekly basis. I'm so glad I'm back in the swing of things and making these episodes for you regularly. regularly. I really hope you're enjoying them. Hopefully you're subscribing to the channel, liking the videos, sharing them with your friends, leaving comments in the comment section below. Matter of fact, here's what I'd like you guys to answer down below. Who do you think had it right? The Federalists or the Anti-Federalists? Strong centralized government, or should the states have the majority of the power in the United States? Let me know your thoughts. As always, you can follow US 101 on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all those links down below in the description box. Guys, I will see you next week for a brand new episode of Us 101. Until then, I am all done. I would recommend that you read up. Read up on this stuff. Read up on history. Read up on civics. You guys, again, we're not going anywhere. This is the perfect time to actually catch up on all the stuff you've wanted to read. Seriously, I've got so many books on my shelves. I'm looking at them right now, and my God. Like, I've read them, but I haven't read them. Right? I gotta dig into them and really tear into the meat and potatoes of these books. Matter of fact, I'm gonna do that. And I'm gonna do that. As soon as the screen fades out, I'm gonna do that. Watch me reaching from my bookshelf. I'll see you guys later. Bye.